She looked me straight in the eye, my own daughter, and said, "Let the storm deal with the garbage." In that moment, I wasn't just standing in the rain. I was locked out of my own life, betrayed by the very blood I had once trusted more than anyone else. That one sentence cut deeper than thunder ever could, and it set into motion everything you're about to hear. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from all over the world. Your comments create a community where storytelling thrives, and we're so grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and prepare for a journey that will keep you hooked from start to finish. Let's get started. Early September in Cedar Ridge always felt like a held breath. The oaks along County Road 7 had just started to bronze, and the prairie beyond town went the color of toast. I could tell the barometer was falling by the ache in my knee before the NOAA radio said a word. On the edge of town, my cedar-sided house sat square to the wind like a stubborn mule, the porch boards worn smooth by years of traffic, the railings rubbed bright where 1,000 hands had rested to watch storms roll in. I'd rebuilt that porch twice, once after a hail burst, once after the termites, and each nail still remembered the swing of my hammer. My name is Mark Ellison, 58, retired too early from the line crew after a back pinch and a ladder slip that made me useful only part-time at Buddy's garage. You learn a certain pace after 3 decades of climbing poles and weather that would make a saner man go back to bed. I still wake to the pitch of wind against the gutters and can tell an ice pellet from a fat raindrop by the way it ticks on aluminum. It's a small gift, but in a small town, you count what you're given. The house keeps the rest of my gifts. Marla's lemon oil still lives in the banister, sweet and a little sharp. There's a knot in the kitchen table we sanded twice and never quite tamed, like the dimple in her cheek when she meant trouble. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, I swear her lavender slips out of the quilt on the couch and rides the sunbeam to the floor. I keep a framed photo of her on the entry table. It faces the door, a lighthouse for a man who's wandered more than he'll admit. Routine is a thing you build when grief chews holes where your days used to be. I sweep the porch after breakfast, tighten the hinge on the screen door when it squeals, set coffee for the next dawn, though I pretend it's only habit. At Buddy's, I rotate tires, check belts, and talk weather with ranchers who still call me Sparky like I never left the bucket truck. Back home, I cook simple, chicken soup, cornbread, beans with a ham hock, and I set a second bowl without thinking. When I catch myself, I leave it there anyway. It hurts less than putting it back. Avery, my daughter, is 27 and all shine lately. She breezes in with catalog perfume and a paper cup from the fancy place on Main, talking about square footage and comps like a radio host who never trips on a word. Her new boyfriend, Colton Reeves, sells a vision of retirement cottages and pocket parks to anyone who'll lean in. I'm proud that she can fill a room, even when I feel the space between us like fresh caulk that hasn't taken. I bite my tongue when the talk turns quick. A man can break his heart and his back the same way by pushing when he should hold. In July, they wheeled me out of a hernia repair, and Avery held my hand like I was 5. She said we should tidy the paperwork in case there was ever an emergency. Medical and financial power of attorney sounded like the sensible sort of umbrella you open before the rain. I signed on the clipboard the nurse offered, while anesthesia still put a fuzz around the edges, and I told myself a trusting father was not a foolish one. That's what I believed then, and it's the truth of that day, even if other truths were hiding nearby. Afterward, the house started wearing new habits, a deadbolt with a harsher click, a keypad on the garage I hadn't asked for, a keypad code Avery tapped too quickly for me to memorize. She called them security upgrades and told me county had warned of break-ins along the river road. I said thanks and made a joke about needing a manual to get into my own place. She laughed, tossed me a look over her shoulder, and said, Welcome to the 21st century, Dad. I laughed too. Jokes lay a bridge where questions might start a fire. A lineman keeps talismans the way a pastor keeps verses. Mine hang in the mudroom. An old climbing belt, spurs dulled from years of bark, a coil of rope that still trusts my hands. I laid out a tarp and a flashlight with fresh batteries on the workbench, like I always do before a front arrives. The habit comforts me. Preparation is a way of telling the world you'll meet it halfway. I set Marla's picture back on the entry table, straightened it with a thumb, and felt steadier than I had any right to feel. By mid-afternoon, the NOAA radio began its staccato. Severe thunderstorm watch for Cedar County, potential for damaging winds, hail to quarter size, rotation not ruled out. On Main Street, the flags hung in the strange stillness that comes before weather, and even the teenagers at the dairy barn looked up between laughs. When the first gust peeled down off the ridge, the telephone lines hummed in that mournful key I used to follow into dark fields with a headlamp and a wrench. Evening slid in on cat feet. I ladled chicken soup into a pot and set a second place without catching myself this time. The sump pump coughed and settled to its work. I walked the perimeter like an old sentry, checked the basement window wells, and tugged once on the new deadbolt to feel its stubborn bite. Doors keep danger out, I told myself, not family. Then the wind chimes tapped a minor chord that sounded too much like doubt to ignore. Thunder walked across the hills after dusk, slow and certain. I adjusted the photo frame in the entry again, not because it needed it, but because my hands wanted purpose. Avery at 5 had eaten popsicles on this porch, feet bare, hair braided, the whole world small enough to fit between us. I told myself I would be steady through the night, through whatever it brought, and that steadiness would be enough. When I clicked the porch light on, its cone of gold fell against a sky going the color of slate. From the steps, the town lights shimmered like fish beneath dark water. Somewhere out there, weather and change were already on the move. I closed the screen gently and listened, counting seconds between flash and sound, measuring a distance I could not yet name. If you're still watching and finding these insights helpful, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Now, let's move on to point number 2. Where the first cracks in trust begin to show. Dusk came down like tarnish, a slow dimming that made the porch light look stronger than it was. The wind had a rasp in it, lifting grit from the drive and combing the ditch grass in one direction, then the other. I could taste metal on the air, that coppery edge storms carry when they mean business. Noah's drone stepped up from watch to warning, and the little digital bar on the radio crawled red as if it were bleeding. Thunder stitched the horizon closer. The pause between flash and report shrank the way a room seems to shrink when a hard truth takes a chair. My wipers threw arcs as I nosed the pickup into my own driveway. Through the front window, the living room lamps cast a domestic glow across the rug. Marla and I bought off a church sale years back. The kitchen light was on too, bright and square over the sink I'd caulked in June. Life inside, that's what the light said. A home remembers, I told myself, the way we teach a dog its name. The porch boards were slick when I climbed the steps, rain working the grain dark, the rail warm under my palm from a day that had held heat until evening took it by the throat. At the door, the new deadbolt flashed its little brass smile in the glow. I knocked. 2 knuckles, steady, and said Avery's name in the voice I use for ranch dogs and skittish steers. Low, friendly, nothing to startle. I told the wood that I only needed my heart medication refill from the counter in the manila folder with the utility receipts, the one clipped with a blue binder clip. These were practical asks, a father's small errands in bad weather. A simple turn of a lock should have answered them. The knob didn't give. The latch felt seated like a tooth that would not pull. Behind the curtain, a spill of white from the television made the fabric glow, then dim like a heartbeat hidden in gauze. I set my ear to the jam, not pressing hard, just enough to let sound find me. Old habit. Wood talks to men who have stood in wind long enough to learn the language. What it said was deliberate silence. When Avery spoke, her voice came through the door thinner than it sounds in open air, the way a familiar song sounds wrong on a cheap radio. She said I should come back tomorrow. She said Colton was reviewing the property and they needed privacy. The words were polite enough taken alone, but they wore a coat that didn't fit. Property, not home. Privacy, not safety. The rain needled the back of my neck where my collar had loosened. I told her about the medication, about the storm line turning nasty, and kept my tone even because a man can lose more than he means to when he lets heat in. From inside came a clink, the delicate chirp of glass on glass, and a man's laugh, easy as a coin flip. The refusal wasn't shouted. It was the soft kind. Practiced, professional, doing the erasing by small degrees. I waited. The wind pushed rain under the eave, and my hand slid a little on the painted wood. Somewhere in the house, a footstep crossed from rug to laminate and back again, and the sound irritated me for being so ordinary. The curtain slipped. For a breath, I saw my daughter's face in a shard of light, sharp as if cut from the night. Then the curtain snapped back. Through the door, in a voice pitched to Carrie, she said, "Let the storm deal with the garbage." The strike wasn't in the word garbage, though that would have been enough. It was in the direction of it. The way a person points a blade not at a thing, but at the one who loves the thing. The kind of sentence that puts a weight on your chest you can't bench. Thunder answered like a mallet on tin. A fresh gust shouldered the house and set the chimes clacking. I felt the new deadbolt click once, a mechanical punctuation from the inside, as if someone had underlined the line that had just been spoken. My chest tightened in a way that reminded me of the little white bottle 10 feet away. I flattened my palm to the door and found it slick. I took it away and didn't look at it because I didn't trust my face not to show something I'd regret. Across the lane, Delilah Hart's door opened the width of a palm. Her porch light painted a shallow fan across the steps. "Mark," she called once, not a question, not a summons, just my name, carried in that low pitch old people use when they've learned the value of not making a show. She didn't step into the rain, she gave me a choice. It's funny what dignity needs to keep breathing, sometimes nothing more than one witness who doesn't look away. I did not pound. Work teaches you that force multiplies stupidity. On a swaying pole, you count 3 breaths and feel the wobble ease. You move only when the rhythm returns to something you can ride. I counted those breaths on my own porch. My pulse, my breath, the rain. I told myself I would not give anyone the story they might want to tell later about the old man making a scene. In the glass, I caught a rectangle of reflection. The photo of Marla on the entry table, a small island of steadiness beyond a lock I couldn't work. In that same blink, a line of little realizations threaded together. The new deadbolt, the keypad I never learned, the clipboard after anesthesia, the word property just now. I didn't have to name the pattern to know it when it started to hum. I stepped back from my threshold. The porch light polished the toes of my boots and turned the rain into strings that broke as they fell. The house loomed the way a stranger's house looms when you've knocked at the wrong door. I let my eyes hold that shape for one more second. Then I looked to Delilah's cracked door and the warm, ordinary square behind her shoulder. I know storms. You get low, you get safe, and you make your plan when the sky stops shouting. The steps down made small splashes and the gutter run through a thin stream over my boot like a kid tripping me for fun. I went slow, not out of age, but because I wanted to leave the argument behind with each footprint. At Delilah's stoop, the wind came hard from the west and rattled my windows behind me like a handful of bones shaken in a cup. I didn't turn. Delilah widened her door with a hand that didn't tremble. From across the lane inside my home, the new deadbolt engaged with a soft, smug click that carried through the weather, a seal on a night that would reach into morning whether I welcomed it or not. If you're still watching and finding these insights helpful, please comment number 2 below to let me know you're with me. Now let's move on to point number 3, when a storm outside reveals the real storm inside. Delilah's kitchen was small and square, white enamel steady while rain tapped the tin awning. She hooked a wool throw over my shoulders before I could object and slid a chipped mug of peppermint tea under my hands. Her wall clock clicked like a metronome. "I'm dripping on your floor," I said, trying for a joke thin enough to carry my pride. "It's a floor," she said. "It earns its keep." She didn't interrogate me. She named what she'd seen. "I watched the curtain move," she said. "I heard enough to know you were refused." I looked at the mug, at the steam lifting like a signal that couldn't decide what to say. My phone buzzed. Tri-County credit. Password changed. New device added. Timestamp tonight. I hadn't requested anything. I showed Delilah, and the peppermint turned metallic on my tongue. "Reception's better on the landline," she said, placing her handset between us like a tool for the task. Security questions came easy: first truck, mother's maiden name, mascot, and then the rep used a phrase with corners. Updates initiated by the authorized agent pursuant to power of attorney. I thanked the voice and hung up. The throw around my shoulder seemed heavier. In July, the day of the hernia repair, Avery had stood bedside with the clipboard. "In case of emergency," she'd said, practical as always, and I signed because that is what a father does when trust feels like oxygen. I didn't read every clause. Anesthesia, fog, and love can look similar in the mirror. "Then we read them now," Delilah said. From my glove box, I keep a manila envelope labeled Utilities and Important. Inside sat photocopies of the medical and financial POA, tucked behind gas receipts and an old sump pump warranty. We spread the papers on her table and let the kitchen turn into an evidence bench by degrees. Dates, witness lines, a generic e-sign disclosure stapled to the back from a later email. The clock kept time for us. The storm, demoted, played rhythm section. Delilah dialed Elaine Porter from the community center and set the handset to speaker. Elaine's voice arrived sanded smooth by long years guiding people through messies. She asked for dates, who held originals, whether any accounts had flinched. When I mentioned the alert, she said, "Preserve everything." Photograph, nothing yet. Bring the whole envelope at 9 a.m. We'll start with a timeline. Delilah made up the short sofa with a quilt that smelled of starch and cedar chest. I lay down and listened to the clock divide the night into equal pieces. Between thunder rolls, I heard the soft whistle in my chest I usually ignore, and the cupboard glass tremble when gusts leaned on the house. Sleep came like a late bus, and I boarded with change. In the dream, I was back on a pole in sleet, the world a gray drumhead. Marla stood on our porch far off. When I looked down, the yard had become my living room. The door wore a bolt like a mouth sewn shut. I woke with my name in my mouth and a new word ringing where home had lived. Property. At first light, the rain thinned to lace. I walked to my place along the public sidewalk, careful not to touch fence or latch. A printer sheet was taped to my door, no entry, renovation in progress. Underneath, a careful signature, Avery Ellison, legal representative. The language was precise enough to cut. I read it once and left it there. At 9 on the dot, Elaine arrived at Delilah's with a canvas tote and yellow legal pad. She listened more than she spoke while she squared the documents by date. Then she asked me to tell the hospital scene once, slow, using times and names instead of feelings. Her pencil made neat fences across the page. When she reached the e-sign disclosure, she angled the paper to the light and stopped. "Here," she said. The audit trail bore an acknowledgement after my discharge, and the geolocation ping sat miles off my home router. A device ID string, familiar from spammy messages Avery had once forwarded, winked like a guilty tag. Elaine's face didn't change much, but the air around her sharpened. She explained calmly the way you teach a knot. Those inconsistencies suggested alteration, maybe execution by someone else after the fact, which moved us from a family quarrel toward fraud and elder financial exploitation. She promised no outcomes, only process. The plan was plain: freeze what could be frozen, call the bank's fraud unit, and prepare a petition for a temporary protective order first thing. The storm outside had dwindled to a fine drizzle, but the room felt denser with clarity. I sat up straighter, not stronger yet, just steadier. Paper would do the lifting for now, lines and dates, not punches. I've hauled wire through worse weather and learned that endurance is a craft. Elaine capped her pen. First, she said, we stop the bleeding. The sentence held like a hand on a wound, and we let it, because that is how you begin to keep what's yours. If you're still watching and finding these insights helpful, please comment number 3 below to let me know you're with me. Now let's move on to point number 4, where the first shocking evidence changes everything. Morning came washed and thin, the storm's edges frayed to threads across Cedar Ridge. I shaved slow, the way you do before a funeral or a court date, and folded my IDs and insurance card into a plastic sleeve Elaine had handed me yesterday. Her checklist sat beside my coffee: driver's license, account numbers, hospital discharge summary, photocopies of both POAs, the bank alert screenshot. Paper first, she'd said. Let paper swing the hammer. At Tri-County Credit, the lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and ballpoint ink. Elaine and I took the glassed-in desk near the safe where the fraud liaison kept a tidy keyboard and a face that practiced calm. I laid out my file with the neatness Buddy likes on his parts counter, labels facing the same way. Elaine nodded once, and I read from her script. We requested a temporary freeze on large transfers, disabled new device logins, and enrolled callback verification on any account changes. The liaison typed, the screen threw little reflections on his glasses, and my name seemed to acquire a shadow with every keystroke. He added a notation, potential unauthorized activity by agent under POA, and slid me incident forms to sign. My hand shook on the first line and steadied on the third. A printed receipt came warm as toast. Back at the community clinic, Elaine sketched a petition for a temporary protective order as if tracing a road she'd driven before. Financial exploitation, access to essential medications, and personal effects. Limits on the agent's authority, pending review. She attached the bank alert, the e-sign audit anomaly, and Delilah's sworn statement about the storm night refusal. She added a list of items I needed from my house: heart medication, work boots, a duffel with clothes, a framed photo of Marla. Not for sentiment, but because naming things has force in a courtroom. We photographed documents with the clinic's tablet, timestamps burned into the corner, hash values embedded like rebar. Elaine explained chain of custody in plain talk: who touched what when, how you'd tell a jury the paper never went wandering, and I repeated it back until the steps sat in my mouth without splinters. Everything we copied went into envelopes labeled by date. The original slid into sleeves like fish into a live well. On the way to Buddy's, I stopped at the VFW. The hall smelled of coffee burned respectful and old flags, that cloth and dust scent that makes a man stand taller. I gave the short version to the old crew. No adjectives, just times and acts. Palms landed on shoulders in the way men say we've got you without embarrassing anyone. Leo offered to witness service of papers if it came to that. Hank pressed a trail cam into my hand, batteries included, with a nod toward my front yard. Small-town ballast is not loud. It presses its weight where you need it until you can hold your own again. I logged 2 hours at the garage, changing belts and listening to the drum of the balancer spin steel into quiet. Work makes a metronome the heart can keep time with. Buddy caught me between tickets and flipped a spare key into my palm. Side door, he said. Truck sleeps here if your situation gets squirrely. I pocketed the key and felt the day notch steadier. From the break room, I left a single voicemail for Avery. I kept it measured, 1 minute exactly, stating that on counsel's guidance I was securing accounts and medication access and inviting her to speak with me in Elaine's presence. I did not accuse, argue, or beg. The tone was boundary, not battle. 10 minutes later, an email arrived from Colton. He wrote that all communications regarding property should go through him, called me compromised post-surgery, and demanded keys and codes he imagined I was hiding. Elaine told me not to respond. She forwarded it to the file, underlined the vocabulary, and drew an arrow to the word property as if to say, there it is again. That evening, I opened a brand new spiral notebook and began a timeline journal from the month Marla died to the storm night. No poetry, ledger clarity, dates, receipts, who said what where. I listed the day the deadbolt was installed, the keypad model number, the color of the binder clip on the utility folder, the exact minute the bank alert hit my phone. Memory needs armor. Details are plate steel. At dusk, I set Hank's trail cam inside Delilah's front window facing my house, angled so the sidewalk and curb fell into frame. I never stepped onto my lawn. A light burned upstairs, then moved, then was gone. I wrote times and durations in the notebook without translating them into meanings. Observation without interpretation felt like discipline, and discipline was how I planned to win. The pharmacy handled curbside pickup if you planned it right. Elaine had drafted a notarized note authorizing release to me in case anyone tried to be clever about access. I held my ID out the truck window and watched the tech bag my refill with a seriousness I appreciated. Small victories stacked like bricks under a sagging beam. I set an alarm on my phone for every dose this week. Bodily steadiness supports legal steadiness. Back at Delilah's table, I spoke a rule into the quiet and wrote it beneath the day's date. Let paper and process do the punching. No porch scenes, no midnight calls, no speeches. I have known storms that feed on attention. Starve them and they pass. Feed them and they eat the house. Before bed, I laid out tomorrow's clothes, labeled folders, bank, POA, incident night, witness, and stuffed a spare pen into each pocket, because courts consume pens the way engines drink oil. I rehearsed the narrative Elaine wanted under my breath in the mirror, who I am, what happened, what I'm asking the court to do. I'm Mark Ellison, I said to the reflection. I maintained the lines in this county for 30 years. I need my medication, my personal effects, and a pause on any transactions until the court can review the documents. It sounded plain, which was the point. Near midnight, the trail cam ticked. I pulled the stills onto Delilah's laptop and saw a familiar shape of a vehicle easing away from my curb, headlights low, plate muddy. I logged the time, printed the frame, and set it on top of the petition packet. Across the lane, my house glowed, then went dark, a chest rising and falling in sleep I couldn't trust. The feeling wasn't calm. It was steadier than yesterday, though, steady enough to meet whatever clash tomorrow had circled on its calendar without telling me. If you're still watching and finding these insights helpful, please comment number 4 below to let me know you're with me. Now let's move on to point number 5. When the courtroom doors finally open. Courthouse mornings have a way of flattening a man. The air smelled like floor wax and vending machine coffee, the kind you drink for warmth more than taste. I arrived early with Elaine, our petition packet riding in a banker's envelope that felt heavier than paper should. The benches were honeyed wood polished by worry. A bailiff with a baritone yawn moved the docket along while a screen blinked names in a patient blue. I ran my story under my breath, not to convince anyone, but to keep the edges straight. Who I am, what happened, what relief I'm asking for. Process would do the punching. My job was to hold still. Across the aisle, Avery sat beside Colton and a young attorney with a tailored jacket that didn't know our county's dust. Avery's blazer was too crisp for a Tuesday. It had the look of an apology bought on sale. She kept her eyes on her lap. Colton wore a public smile with private teeth, a tie the color of a sports car, and a posture that said he liked rooms where everyone had to listen to him. I glanced at my boots, scuffed, cleaned, honest, and felt rooted enough. When our case was called, the judge set the scope like a level on a board. We were here for temporary protections and access to medication and personal effects, not to decide ownership or rewrite anyone's life. The boundary calmed the room. Colton's attorney stood and arranged words the way a salesman arranges samples. He said I was vulnerable post-surgery, that Avery acted under lawful power of attorney to stabilize the property, that the incident at the door was a miscommunication during renovations. Polished language is good at blurring edges. It cannot hide weight. Elaine rose with our timeline. She spoke like a carpenter ordering cuts. Surgery date and hour, POA execution, storm night refusal, bank alert. She handed up the e-signature audit trail, a neat little column of times that did not match where I had been or what I had touched. She added Delilah's sworn statement about the refusal. No drama, just numbered exhibits with chain of custody tags like stitching that would hold when pulled. With the court's leave, Elaine cued my phone on speaker. The clip was short and ugly. "Let the storm deal with the garbage," Avery's voice said, bright with a bitterness that didn't belong to the child I raised. Colton's laugh rode the edge, and thunder rolled behind it like a truck downshifting. The courtroom hum fell a notch. I didn't turn to look at my daughter. I looked at the judge because that was the only set of eyes that mattered right then. The judge asked Avery a question as plain as a nail. Did she deny me entry while my medication was inside? Avery's hands worried the hem of that blazer. "It was a bad night," she said. "Things were said." She did not deny. The judge asked who changed the bank credentials. Counsel tried to answer for her, but the phrase authorized agent was no longer just a notation. It was a live wire. Relief came narrow and clean. The court restrained transactions by any agent under the POA until review, required the bank to use callback verification to me only, and authorized supervised entry within 24 hours for me to retrieve medication, clothing, specified personal items, and mail. A review hearing would come in 2 weeks. The judge added a warning that interference with supervised entry or attempts to alter insurance or ownership without leave of court might be contempt. The warning found Colton where he sat. His smile misfired and showed the metal behind it. In the corridor, the hall smelled less like wax and more like people exhaling. Elaine touched my sleeve and said to keep the line I'd been holding, "No contact." We scheduled the pickup with the sheriff's office. Delilah had sat in the back through it all. She passed by, pressed my elbow for one heartbeat, and slipped away. That's how real help behaves, present enough to brace, light enough not to bruise. While we waited at the clerk's window, my phone lit with a local number from the insurer. The adjuster's tone had the neutrality of someone reading off a cliff edge. A claim had been filed listing Avery as sole insured regarding roof and wiring damage from the storm. The claim was flagged due to irregularities in ownership and POA. Status on hold pending clarification. "Translation," Elaine murmured later. "The fast money Colton needed just got frozen in the pipe. When quick cash clots, men like him get reckless, and recklessness leaves prints." Elaine explained it as we walked to the sheriff's substation. The insurance snag reframed the urgency of renovations, the push to seize control, the vocabulary of property. It didn't prove fraud by itself, but it laid motive like tinder. Paper again, doing what fists never could. At the substation, a deputy with a square jaw and a checked patience set a time for late afternoon. We listed exactly what I would take. Heart medication, work boots, a duffel of clothes, my tool roll, Marla's framed photo, any medical records and mail addressed to me. Boundaries make even kindness safer. Elaine handed the deputy our order. He nodded once, the way a man accepts a post. The entry itself was quiet. The deputy stood in the doorway like a period at the end of a sentence, and I stepped past him into a house that knew me and didn't. Lemon oil lived under a skin of new paint smell. A lamp burned in an empty room as if someone had left a thought unfinished. I collected what the order allowed and touched nothing else. No accusations, no speeches. I signed the deputy's inventory with the steadiness this whole week had been trying to knock out of me. The deadbolt looked different from this side, same mechanism, different meaning. On the dining table, a trifold display leaned against a bowl, renderings of senior-friendly cottages, curved paths, pastel benches, and Colton's logo grinning in the corner. A sticky note read, "Planning Commission, Thursday." I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The next room I would walk into had chairs and microphones and the kind of silence that evaluates character. Reputation is currency there. Records are credit. Outside, the sky had hardened into a Midwestern blue that makes every shadow crisp. I set Marla's photo in the truck with care, the glass catching a sliver of sun that felt like permission. Paper and process had drawn first blood, not victory, but a clean opening cut. We drove back to Delilah's where the next packet would be built, and I let the hum of the tires be the drum I marched to. Thursday was already coming down the road big as a silo, and for the first time since the storm, I believed I'd meet it standing. The text came after sunset, a thin blue bubble on a gray screen. Could we meet somewhere quiet? I chose the VFW backlot because gravel remembers tire tracks, and men tend to keep their voices low there. The soda machine hummed like it was thinking. A sodium street lamp threw a jaundiced cone across the dumpsters, and moths orbited the bulb as if heat were a planet. The smell of cut hay drifted from the fairgrounds, and a train put a soft horn on the far side of town, the kind of sound that arrives already fading. Avery's headlights crested the alley and died. She parked crooked, got out too fast, and leaned on the door as if it were holding her up. Her makeup had smeared into something more human than hopeful. She worried the edge of her phone case with her thumb and searched my face as if she'd left something there last week. I stayed near the tailgate, hands flat on the cold metal, letting the texture of the diamond plate steady me. Words tumbled. Colton had opened a line of credit using her name. He'd pushed her to get me to sign consent forms to clean up title. A payment had already come due. She was terrified of default, of what her real estate circle would whisper if the gloss wore off. She kept saying it had gotten bigger, faster than she thought, like a river that looks lazy until you step in. I listened with my jaw set and my breath even, learning the scale of the water. When she ran out of speed, I gave her one path. Cut him out of every paper, I said. Stand up at the commission and tell the truth. Do it now and I won't let the town use you for sport. Don't. And we let process run you over as it runs him. She stared at the cracked gravel between us, searching for a softer option that wasn't there. Her voice dropped to the place where children hide. They'll hear that line, she said. They'll know I called you garbage. I told her facts were the only rope long enough to reach shore. I said I could carry that sentence if it bought her a way to carry herself. It wasn't absolution and it wasn't accusation. It was a ledger entry written without shaking. Thursday put on its municipal clothes, the multi-purpose room in the city building, glossed tile that squeaked under church shoes, the flag at one end of the dais and the county seal at the other. Retirees arrived early and claimed the good rows. Contractors leaned against the back wall with arms crossed. The civics class took up a cluster of seats and practiced whispering as if it were a graded skill. Poster boards along the side showed pastel cottages on curved paths. Colton stood beside them with his smile restored to showroom condition. The chair called the agenda item and Colton stepped to the mic. He spoke amenities, accessibility ramps, pocket parks, tax base, revitalization. He called my lot an underutilized asset, and the phrase pinged in my ribs like a bad bearing. Commissioners nodded politely, pens making neat furrows on legal pads. Midwestern restraint kept the room tamped down like tobacco in a pipe. Public comment opened. Elaine's voice fit the room like a level finds plum. She introduced herself, noted that counsel had provided materials for the record, and summarized, not dramatized, what they contained. Emails referencing "move the old man before insurance pays," and "Avery will handle the door the insurers hold for irregularities, the e-sign anomalies." She laid the facts on the table like tools arranged by size. Murmurs rose and fell, the civics teacher raised a finger, and his row found silence. I followed, hat in hand because some habits aren't for show. 30 years on county lines, the storm night refusal and the supervised entry, the narrow order the court had already issued. I asked for delay, not victory. Review, not applause. I kept my eyes on the dais and spoke as a neighbor with a problem, not a man auditioning for martyrdom. From the third row, Avery stood. Her voice shook but didn't fail. She said she had provided the emails. She said she was not in full control of what the door meant that night. She didn't reach for sympathy. She offered facts like a woman paying a debt in the smallest bills she had. The temperature in the room changed, gossip drained off, and gravity walked in. The chair thanked speakers and cited policy. The application was tabled pending legal clarification and referred to counsel. She added a line about appreciating civility. It wasn't a verdict, but it was a stop sign planted in concrete. Colton's jaw clicked once before his smile reasserted itself in a shape that fooled no one. In the aisle, as people funneled past water coolers and bulletin boards, he leaned too close to Avery and hissed something with temperature in it. A nearby teacher looked at me. A quick, professional question. "Did you need a witness?" I lifted 2 fingers, a small yes. Elaine, already moving, wrote names and time on a yellow pad with the quiet efficiency of someone building a bridge while the river rose. Outside under the flagpole, the halyard clinked against metal in a light wind. Sodium lights washed the parking lot pale. Avery asked whether what she had done could be undone, the way a person asks a doctor how much of a limb can be saved. "Truth is a door you can still open," I said. "It doesn't swing by itself." She held my eyes 1 second longer than she used to, then walked toward the 2 officers waiting to take her voluntary statement. Direction, not absolution. Sometimes that's as clean as redemption gets. I stood with the banker's envelope under my arm and watched the crowd thin to lines of taillights. Relief came as a quiet correction in the inner ear, the kind that steadies a man who's been listening. Not triumph, not forgiveness, just the ground deciding to stop tilting. Elaine joined me without asking how I was. Her phone pinged, a message that the commission had entered the tabling into its minutes and forwarded the packet to the county attorney. Threads tugged elsewhere. Insurers, credit lines, counsel. Paper kept walking while we stood still. On the drive back to Delilah's, Cedar Ridge wore its ordinary-like armor. Porches lit, sprinklers marking circles on tired lawns, a dog barking at the wrong truck. I rolled the window down and let the night air carry hay and diesel and the low hum of a town that had not yet decided what to think. I didn't need it to decide tonight. I only needed to hold my lane. Tomorrow would bring fallout, and after fallout comes shoring, and after shoring comes the bill. I tightened my grip on the envelope, felt its inches of ballast, and believed for the first time since the storm that steadiness might just be a skill I hadn't forgotten. So, if you're still watching and finding these insights helpful, please comment number 5 below to let me know you're with me. Now, let's move on to point number 6, where a daughter faces a choice she can't avoid. I woke before sunrise at Delilah's, the kind of waking that feels like a hand on your shoulder rather than an alarm. The house was hushed but purposeful. Kettle burbling, clock ticking, an old floorboard giving once and then settling. Outside, the front had rinsed the heat from Cedar Ridge and left a cool, damp smell that reminded me of creosote on fresh poles. Weather leaves a residue, so does standing up in public. My back carried both. Elaine's email landed first, the commission minutes written in that tidy government voice that turns last night's theater into today's calendar. Application tabled, packet referred to county attorney. She added notes about likely sequences and deadlines, arrows pointing from review to investigator outreach to hearing windows. The words clicked into place like rungs on a ladder. No drama, just something you could climb if you kept your grip. The insurer followed. Their notice didn't raise its voice, but the meaning did. Storm claim on hold, pending proof of ownership and POA validity. Irregularities may affect coverage. The sentence put a draft through Colton's house of cards. Easy money turns men like him into sprinters. A blocked payout forces them to change sports or cheat. Either way, pressure was going to make sound. Tri-County's fraud unit checked in with an activity log number and confirmation that callback verification to me only had been activated. Attempts overnight had rattled the door and failed. I wrote the names, the time, and the ticket ID in my journal, bolting memory to paper. The habit steadied me like clipping to a safety line on a windy climb. By 9, the sheriff's office called to walk the edges of the judge's order. Temporary re-entry and occupancy were authorized for health and safety. Patrol would check by. I arranged to sleep in my own house, promised to keep Delilah on speed dial, and stuck the deputy's card on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a wrench. Small-town procedure can feel like fatherly instructions, not insulting, just specific. Crossing my threshold with a duffel and tool roll, I noticed the lemon oil lived under a skin of new paint smell. A brown bloom had opened on the ceiling where the roof took water. One window, barely cracked, leaked a cool thread of air. I set Marla's photo on the mantel and opened 2 windows to pull the paint out. Then I wrote a punch list. Tarp edge, attic fan hum, GFC. I test in the kitchen, settle the basement dehumidifier. Work is a kind of prayer if you do it with both hands. Neighbors let me know the news had traveled without asking for a version. 2 nods from across driveways. A casserole left on the stoop without a note. Leo's pickup idling slow at the corner like a man who takes the long way home sometimes. No gossip on the phone, just presence. In a small place, that's the highest form of speech. Elaine relayed that Avery had begun cooperating, selected emails turned over, a voluntary statement scheduled. Fear breathed through every sentence, fear of Colton, of public shame, but she responded to clear tasks and firm lines. I sent one text and kept it short. Follow Elaine's instructions. No house visits. Proud of you for telling the truth. It was human without being open-ended, and like everything else now, it left a record. Colton went thin in the air, a bounced calendar invite, a vague out of office, then silence. Elaine said silence comes before flight or threat. Either way, it was information. She preserved voicemails, listed probable addresses, and flagged the insurance angle for the investigator. Paper doesn't blink. Hank and 2 old linemen rolled up with coffee and an extra ladder. We trimmed a torn shingle line, replaced a scorched GFCI, chalked a straight cut where the fascia had sagged, and fastened a temporary patch. Every fix felt like a sentence that said, "This house is occupied by its owner. This story moves forward by acts, not speeches." We didn't talk about the commission. We measured twice, cut once, and let the new nails find bite. By evening, Delilah's stew steamed on my table while the house practiced being mine again. Relief arrived like a level finding true, a bubble sliding to center and resting there. It wasn't triumph. The voicemail line still lived in the room like a nail you might step on if you forgot where it lay. I wrote in my journal that accountability is not vengeance. The first change is tomorrow, the second changes you. At dusk, the trail cam caught a slow pass of an unfamiliar sedan. The plate was muddy, but I got the prefix, the time, the direction. I called the deputy, reported it without adjectives, and agreed to exterior lights, no confrontations, and letting paper and patrol do their jobs. Alert is a posture, paranoia is a hobby. I had no interest in collecting new ones. The administration of a life is a bridge you build while standing on the riverbank. Elaine set the review hearing date and asked for an updated affidavit, an inventory of retrieved items, a letter from the pharmacist about medication access, copies of commission minutes, and the insurer's hold. I organized folders: bank, insurance, commission, sheriff, health, slid color tabs on their spines, and made duplicate sets. Order is a discipline a body can master when larger matters refuse to cooperate. I put the spare key with Delilah, dropped a sealed envelope of document copies at Elaine's office, and taped the sheriff's card by the landline. Lights went on timers. Neighbors on either side kept my cell. Trust, rebuilt, felt less like hope and more like architecture. On the porch, with Marla's photo visible through the front window, I thought about the difference between forgiveness and permission. One might come, the other would not. The porch light that once did all the welcoming now marked a line I would not let blur. My phone vibrated. Avery ready to sign whatever Elaine deemed necessary, asking if I would be there when she met officers tomorrow. Yes, I typed, then added a condition. We tell the whole truth. I hit send and stood in the steady dark while the house hummed under a piece held up by paper, neighbors, and choice. Morning laid a pale ribbon over Cedar Ridge when I parked beside the police substation. The square was empty enough to hear the flag halyard tap the pole, a hollow thunk that set the tempo for the day. Copier toner wafted through the glass doors every time someone passed. I stood on the curb with a paper cup warming my hands and told myself I was present, not performing. Avery came up the sidewalk small in a plain cardigan, hair pulled back like for an exam. Shadows under her eyes made her look younger and older at once. We faced each other with the distance a town would approve of and went over the rules in a steady voice. Everything said in the interview room, counsel present, no private sidebars, no deleting or cleaning, and I would leave if blame crept in. She nodded twice and matched my pace to the door. In the conference room, the detective set a legal pad between us and made the air plain with facts. They had linked Colton to an out-of-state marriage and a running probe for elder exploitation. The words turned the thermostat down. Cooperation stopped being courtesy and became leverage. The offer was simple: provide devices and a full statement, and the charging decisions would remember that choice. I watched Avery hear the difference between help and salvation. Tex took her phone and an external drive per Elaine's checklist. Serial numbers were read aloud, forms signed in blue ink, seals pressed, time stamps logged. I saw Avery's shoulders slip an inch when the phone left her hand. Fear and relief braided together. Chain of custody became a physical thing. Zip bags, stickers, signatures. Paper replaced panic molecule by molecule. With Elaine at the end of the table, Avery gave dates and subject lines and instructions she could quote. Move the old man before insurance pays. I'll handle the door. No dramatic flourishes, no teary detours, just the ledger version. The detective translated jargon into plain English, slowing at each hinge word so the record would hold. I kept my eyes on the table grain and wrote anchors in my notebook. Times, locations, the order of events, bolting recollection to wood. Afterward, at the clinic, Elaine moved briskly through the unwinding. She drafted a revocation of the financial POA, prepared a notice disputing any post-op signatures that showed alteration, and printed creditor notifications that named the disputed authority. We signed in blue, watched the clerk timestamp, and listened to certified letters thump into an outgoing tray like nails into a joist. Relief didn't feel like a wave. It felt like a checklist. Sundown Pharmacy printed a letter documenting the storm night disruption and the supervised retrieval. The pharmacist slid it across with a grave little nod that felt like civic ritual. Tri-County emailed that credential change attempts had ceased. Activity log updated. I stapled confirmations into the bank and health folders. Color tabs aligned the way a man squares picture frames when he needs one small thing to be true. Hank and two linemen turned up with tarps, a ridge cap, and the casual competence that makes work sound like conversation. We ran a proper tarp line, checked the attic fan bearings, swapped a breaker flirting with failure, and set the temporary cap with a rhythm a drummer would admire. The house changed tonalities. Less echo, more occupation. I logged materials and hours for the insurer, but the point was safety you could touch. The town stitched itself tighter. Delilah ferried sandwiches and mentioned the church pantry's dehumidifier without making a production. Leo swung by to offer his chainsaw if limbs sagged over the line. None of it asked me to perform gratitude. All of it required me to keep showing up with my own tools. Community isn't charity, it's choreography. Elaine texted mid-afternoon. Avery wanted to add a supplemental statement clarifying that Colton supervised the lock change and drafted the renovation notice. It wasn't confession for applause, it filled a gap that would otherwise collect speculation. Small acts tilt vectors. I wrote the time, the subject, and the detective's initials in my ledger and let the ink stand for a step. Near dusk, Avery asked to stop by the sidewalk, public and visible. Cicadas braided a thin wire of sound through the maples. She said, barely above them, that she was sorry for the door and for the word. I answered with the rule we had filed. Thank you. All contact goes through Elaine, and we tell the whole truth. The apology was received like a registered letter, signed for, not displayed. An alert from Elaine arrived while the sky was still the color of aluminum. Colton had been picked up at a model home outside town on outstanding warrants and the case file that had started to cohere. I didn't cheer. I wrote the time, agency, and case number, closed the notebook, and let justice be a verb instead of a feeling. Scorekeeping is for games. This was a roof. Back inside, I finished the house systems. Motion lights at corners, timer synced, neighbor phone tree printed and tacked by the landline, spare key lodged with Delilah, document duplicates lodged with Elaine. Anxiety turned into switches and paper and switches again until it wore itself down. The effect was visible even to me. My hands stopped looking for a job they couldn't name. I wrote a page called Rules at the Kitchen Table. Forgiveness versus Reentry. 1 column each. I could forgive in time. I could not permit the old pattern to rent a room. The difference clarified like sap boiled to syrup. Same source, different weight. I slid the page into a manila folder and felt the room square itself by a quiet degree. Before bed, I checked the trail cam, nothing but a cat and a possum conducting their night business. Patrol rolled by at 10 and again at 2. The house creaked in familiar places and kept its counsel. Rain tested the patched roof after midnight with a new tentative tone, and the ceiling answered with clean silence. A small, precise victory, the kind you can stack. I reviewed Elaine's calendar under the lamplight. Review hearing set, adjuster scheduled to inspect. County attorney acknowledged the commission packet. Tomorrow would put fates to paper. I set Marla's photo upright on the mantel, clicked off the kitchen light, and carried the day's steadiness up the stairs like a tool you're careful not to drop. If you're still watching and finding these insights helpful, please comment number 6 below to let me know you're with me. Now let's move on to point number 7, where betrayal starts to turn into repair. By late morning, the courthouse had the busy hush of a library with shoes. Dusted blinds let in stripes of light, and the counter smelled like copy paper and coffee from a bailiff's dented thermos. I stood with my color-tabbed binders, bank, insurance, commission, sheriff, health, rules, and read the labels like a litany. It wasn't nerves so much as making sure every step found flooring. The judge opened by setting the limits again, review of interim orders, indicators bearing on the power of attorney and the status of temporary possession. Elaine nodded once to remind me we would keep to exhibits in sworn statements. When asked, I answered plain, medication retrieved under supervision, temporary occupancy without incident, cooperation with patrol checks. No embroidery, the court doesn't buy adjectives. Elaine walked the paper spine we had built one page at a time. First, the bank activity log and the callback record that showed attempts blocked overnight. Then the e-signature audit anomalies with the geolocation ping that didn't belong to me. She added the insurer's hold notices, the pharmacist's letter documenting storm night access, the sheriff's supervised entry inventory, and the planning commission minutes that tabled the project. Chain of custody got explained like a recipe, measured and unstirred. Avery arrived with separate counsel. She confirmed her supplemental statement, acknowledged providing devices, and didn't contest revocation of her financial POA. Her attorney asked the court to recognize that cooperation for charging decisions elsewhere. I kept my eyes on the bench and my hands flat on my folder, keeping still as a way to stay honest. The judge ruled with the tidy force of a straight edge. Post-op POA amendments executed under alteration were voided. The prior POA narrowed to medical only with explicit limits. Sole control of the house and accounts restored to me, memorialized in the record. Temporary occupancy remained in effect until final resolution. The order sounded less like victory than like a level finding true. Costs were set for later. Any civil restitution would wait until investigations matured. Counsel were directed to confer with the insurer once title and control were clarified. Practical next steps took the place of heat. You could feel the room cool to the temperature of work. From the prosecutor's liaison came a brief on Colton, charged on out-of-county warrants with local counts pending, bail hearings scheduled. The judge reminded everyone that criminal matters were not for this docket. I wrote down case numbers like I was recording part numbers at Buddy's. Information is not emotion. It stays where you put it. At the clerk's window, I received certified copies of the order. The rubber stamp thunked a firm syllable into each page, and the papers went into a fresh sleeve. Elaine filed the revocation notices with the bank and the recorder while I scheduled an on-site inspection with the insurer. Then the hallway exhaled us back into sunlight. Sometimes closure is just the sound a file makes when it slides home. Back at the house, the real punctuation came from hammers. Hank and the crew swapped out the temporary tarp for proper shingles, set a permanent ridge cap, and flashed the chimney like it had always been right. I reinstalled the porch light fixture, tripped and reset each GFCI, and rehung the photo wall with Marla in the center, straight to a small spirit level. Each repair felt like a sentence returning the house to its grammar. Neighbors acknowledged without ceremony. Delilah showed with a cherry pie still warm and a no-rush wave. Leo dropped a dehumidifier borrowed from the church pantry with a sign-out slip he'd already filled except for my name. 2 mailboxes down the block, someone lifted a palm in a half salute. No one asked for a story. The nod said, "Settled enough." I called Avery with Elaine on speaker and read the rules as if they were mile markers. Spare key hosted with Delilah. Duplicate documents housed with Elaine, any house visit by prior arrangement in daylight, all financial matters handled by me. Understood, Avery said. I kept the call short, not cold. Boundaries don't need explanation, they need consistency. Elaine forwarded proof before dinner that Avery had enrolled in a financial literacy and credit repair program, plus her start date for community service hours at the senior center. I logged the times in my ledger and felt something modest and right-sized, not absolution, but direction. The difference matters the way wire gauge matters. It determines what current you can carry without burning. A narrow band of showers crossed town near evening, the kind of rain that writes in cursive on new shingles. I stood under the eave and listened. No drip at the hall ceiling, no bruise of brown blooming above the doorway, just steady percussion. Water doing what water does. The sound recalibrated the whole day better than any speech could. Avery stopped at the sidewalk with a paper bag of groceries and the set face of someone learning to show up without dramatics. "I'm sorry for the door and the word," she said. "Thank you," I answered. "We'll keep the rules we set." I took the bag from the top step. We didn't cross thresholds. Respect and distance can live in the same minute. Supper was simple. I set Marla's photo upright and wrote "Today" in my notebook. What changed, what stayed. Forgiveness is something I'll walk at my own speed. Permission stays shut. Tomorrow's tasks got 3 lines. Reseal the back window, oil the hinge on the laundry room door, call Buddy about the brake lathe that would carry me forward without cord ink. Before bed, I made one last lap. The house breathed evenly, boards answering boards in a language I had missed. The porch light threw a disciplined circle on wet steps. I set the new order in the fire safe, locked the door, and felt the lock answer not against love, but in favor of the life that needs guarding. You don't forget a storm because the roof holds. You remember it differently, as instruction. I turned out the hall light and let the steadiness stay. The house made the small, contented noises of something put back together. Under the new ridge cap, the night was steady, the gutters ticking out the last stray drip like a clock that remembered rain but didn't encourage it. If I stood still in the kitchen, I could smell lemon oil buried under a flatter note of fresh paint, and behind it the low, indifferent purr of the refrigerator, a domestic metronome that asked nothing of me but to keep the door shut. Safety felt earned rather than assumed, an economy I understood. I set the rules folder beside the Today notebook and drew 3 columns on a clean page. What was lost? A kind of unguarded trust, a few illusions I'd mistaken for neighborliness, the luxury of assuming my signature lived where I left it. What was kept? The house, the work still in my hands, a heart that beat on time with help from a little white bottle, the dignity of walking into the hardware store without rehearsing a speech. What was built? A paper trail with spine enough to stand, boundaries that speak so I don't have to, a net of people who show up with casseroles and trail cams instead of opinions. Arithmetic has a way of cooling hot days. Love needed new grammar. I wrote the sentence I meant to live by. Love without boundaries curdles into permission. Boundaries without love calcify into walls. The line for me would be firm procedure paired with soft speech. Forgiveness wasn't a verdict I could bang with a gavel. It would be a practice, a sequence of small, repeatable acts that refused to worship crisis. I oiled the laundry room hinge until it stopped announcing itself and resealed the back window where rain once nosed in. I put the spare flashlight on the hall table and checked its batteries like I'd check a ladder rung before my foot trusted it. These were ordinary sacraments, not grand gestures, but liturgy you could repeat at dawn or midnight without a priest. The house answered my wrench and cloth with the calm a man can live inside. Avery's program start date sat circled on the calendar. Her volunteer hours at the senior center were scribbled beneath in a thinner hand. I pictured her handing coffee to a man with a cane that looked like mine. Hope arrived in a size I could hold, not restoration on demand, not a cinematic hug on the porch, but the agreement to leave a door unlocked during daylight by appointment. I wrote that too, unlocked during daylight by appointment, because clarity is a kindness no matter which side of a threshold you're on. The net beneath me kept its quiet tension. Delilah's stew line had been a dependable river this month. Leo's slow patrols passed like weather that meant well. The VFW had offered more backbone than bluster. Pride that refuses help is just fear with its hat on. Accepting help, I decided, can be a form of modeling, permission for other men my age to ask before they fall. You can lead by standing still and letting someone set a dehumidifier at your feet. Buddy called about the week's shifts. "Clock in at 8, take the lathe after lunch," he said. "We'll pretend you never left." That was grace in a garage dialect. The craft that kept lights on for strangers would keep my own story powered. Torque set right, bearings greased, bills paid, days stitched into a fabric that held. I wrote our plan on the calendar and felt the slide of something heavy into a groove built for it. Legal clarity began to look like moral clarity in a work shirt. I filed certified copies of the order in the fire safe and taped a one-page sheet inside the pantry door. If storm, then meds, documents, neighbor calls, breaker check, fuel for the generator. When emotions surge, let process be the governor. Machines obey that rule. I could too. I played the voicemail line once, alone, to learn whether it still owned any part of my steering. "Let the storm deal with the garbage," Avery's voice said, as if I were a pile at the curb. It landed like a pebble now, not a brick. I named it what it was, evidence from a bad night, and deleted it because shame is a currency I refuse to spend, even when I think I'm buying justice. Memory will keep what it needs without my help. Then I wrote Marla a letter I would never mail. I told her the roof holds, the ridge is true, and the girl we loved is walking toward truth in small, accountable steps. I described the photo wall rehung with her in the center and the way rain now plays percussion without finding a leak to solo through. Grief felt less like an anchor and more like mentorship across time. I thanked her for the stubbornness I used to call mule-headedness. Older men don't always want sermons, so I wrote maxims for my own age in the first person and pinned them to the corkboard. Read before you sign. Tape a neighbor's number by the phone. Teach your boundaries out loud so the people you love don't have to guess where they are. If a storm comes from your own porch, step under another roof and plan. Document what hurts. Let paper do first aid before you try to run. I admitted in ink where it could stay put that the urge to humiliate died when the paperwork worked. Revenge is theatrical. Repair is carpentry. The power I keep is the power to maintain, to testify cleanly when asked, and to show my face in town without flinching. Reputation is a tool, not a trophy. Used right, it helps you lift. A light shower wrapped the shingles and turned sidewalks the color of pewter. I stood under the eave with my palm out and felt cool water that did not leak. The storm hadn't made me steal. It reminded me I already knew how to brace and build. I dialed Avery and left a message simple as a grocery list. "Sunday chili at noon," I said. "If you'd like to come, text Elaine to confirm. We'll eat on the porch, hospitality inside a frame. Trust as architecture rather than a mood." Before bed, I wrote 3 tasks for tomorrow. Call the insurer after inspection, return the church dehumidifier with thanks, buy number 8 exterior screws, and titled the page, "Forward. The future is not a speech, it is a list you can finish." I clicked off the porch light, locked the door for the life that needs guarding, and carried the notebook to the nightstand. The house breathed evenly. No sermons, no symbols, just the small proof of a roof that holds, a man resting, and a story that chose balance over victory and found, to his surprise, that balance was victory enough. In the end, the storm was never just weather. It was the moment a life learned the difference between being strong and being steady. Justice didn't arrive with a shout. It came on clean pages and clear boundaries, the quiet power of saying what is true and doing what is right, again and again, until the roof finally holds. Forgiveness became practice, not a performance. Dignity became a daily habit. Read before you sign, ask for help before you break, keep the porch light for welcome and the lock for the life that needs guarding. Repair outran revenge because carpentry beats theater when the rain returns. If this story left you with a steadier breath, carry it into your own storms. Build your systems. Write things down. Teach your lines out loud. Accept the hands that show up and offer yours when it's your turn to stand on the dry side of the door. Balance may not look like victory from the outside, but living inside it feels like home, a roof that holds, a light that stays on, a future you can plan by. Thank you for watching and being part of this community. We'd love to hear what resonated with you most. Drop a comment with your thoughts or the timestamp that hit hardest. If you found value here, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story of resilience and hard-won clarity. Until then, take care of your roof, your records, and your heart, and may your light stay on through every kind of weather.